one there, one behind me. The event tonight is made possible by a grant from the Trillium Foundation. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank them for the opportunity to ask authors such as Mr. Tom Harper to come here tonight. I'll just give you a short biography of Mr. Harper in case people don't know him. I'm sure you all do, though. He was born in 1929 in Toronto. He was educated at the University of Toronto, where he graduated, and he later went to the University of Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. And he came back to Toronto in 1954 and studied theology at the Wycliffe College at the University of Toronto, where he also taught Greek. He was later ordained as an Anglican priest. And from 1957 until 1964, he served at the Congregation of St. Margaret's in the Pines in Scarborough, Ontario, in West Hill. From 1964 to 1971, Mr. Harper was professor of the New Testament at the University of Toronto's School of Theology. He has written approximately 18 books. 9 or 10 of them were bestsellers. He has also hosted radio and television programs, but you probably, he's best known for his work with the Toronto Star, where he worked as a journalist for 30 years, 12 years of which he was the newspaper's religion editor. And since leaving that position in 1984, he still contributed articles to the Toronto Star on religious and ethical issues. So he is going to read from 3 books tonight. First, from Living Waters. Second, The Pagan Christ. And third, Water into Wine. After the reading, he will take questions from the audience. But he has requested that all the questions be written down. That's why you've been given the pieces of paper and pencils. We will collect those questions at the end, and then he will answer your questions for you and have a discussion. If the discussion is not over by 8:30, which it could go on all night, but we're going to stop it at 8:30, and you're all invited upstairs to have refreshments. And the refreshments are made available by the Friends of the Library, the Hidden Gold Mine Bakery, and Amazing Coffee. So I hope you have fun tonight. We're very, very lucky to have him here tonight because he has a brand new book out called Water into Wine. It's only been out for 2 or 3 weeks. So this is a wonderful opportunity for us to have him here. So I hope you'll join me in giving him a warm, warm welcome to Madoc.
Thank you all very much. Excuse me. It really is a pleasure to be here in Madoc. We drive by on the highway occasionally, but we haven't had the opportunity too often to get into your town. I noticed on our approach that there are a lot of signs around about camping, and it's, I'll speak into the mic if that's better. Thank you. That it's quite an area for camping, and it reminded me of the story of Sherlock Holmes. You may have heard that Sherlock Holmes and Watson decided to go camping in the Lake District, and they found a very nice spot by a lake, and erected their tent, had their fire and a couple of bacon sandwiches, and went to bed. In the middle of the night, Sherlock Holmes went like that with his elbow to Watson and said, "Watson, Watson, wake up." And he came awake. He said, What's the matter? What's happening?" He said, "Watson, look around. What do you see?" Watson looked around. He said, "Well, it's just a beautiful starry night." He said, "I have never seen the stars like this, not since I was a boy." Sherlock Holmes said, "You idiot, Watson, somebody has stolen our tent." You have to be careful. I had a little radio interview with one of your number before you all gathered, and it took me back. I began my career in media on radio. I was teaching theology at the time, at Wycliffe College, and it was Greek and the New Testament. And it was very learned stuff at one level. But it was very stuffy, and it had very little to do with what was going on outside in the world. And one day, in the midst of all of this, I was a little disappointed because I thought if I got to theological college and I could train the young men and the young women, that would be the crucial way to shape the church of the future. However, it wasn't quite like that. It seemed to be a very incestuous kind of group of people using a language which nobody, as I say, outside the ivy walls of our college could even understand. And I read a report in a British paper and it said this. They had just done a survey of theological students in Britain, and they found that at the end of the course of theology of 3 years or longer, the men and women involved were less able to talk to their fellow men and women than they had been when they went in at the beginning. And, we were using words like eschatological and pneumatological, soteriological, and logical, but the illogical part was, as I say, it didn't really communicate with ordinary men and women. And so I got involved at night while I was teaching in the daytime, much to the distress of my principal, in an open line radio show. And it was on a country and western radio station. I knew nothing at the time about Western music, country and Western music at all. And I will never forget the first time I heard the introduction to my show when they told me when it would be on the promo. By the way, they decided to call the program Harper's Heaven and Hell, which just about that caused me problems because I knew the bishop was going to have a hernia when he heard it. But anyway, Harper's Heaven and Hell, and they announced the night, and then the disc jockey went on with the next record. He said, and the next record is, I won't go hunting with you, Luke, but I'll go chasing women. Oh my God. What on earth has happened? And here's this prissy professor from Oxford who specializes in Greek on that kind of show. And they went on with other theological gems like drop kick me Jesus through the goalposts of light. Anyway, it was fun doing that radio interview tonight, and it took me back to some of those roots. Is the sound all right, or am I speaking in it too loudly? It's all right? I'm going to do 3 short readings. It's always alarming when you see an author staggering to the front of the room with 3 of his beloved children under his arm. But I can promise you I am not going to read very much. But I will read the longest one, and it's not that long, is from a book called Living Waters, Selected Writings on Spirituality. This book came out after The Pagan Christ, and it is a selection. To be honest, my wife is here. Where are you, Sue? Just stand up. This is Susan, who is responsible. She's responsible for everything. Anyway, she largely did the collection, and it is a collection of what we feel are the best of my columns over 35 years of writing them. And most of them are from the more recent period, and they've all been updated and edited and brought into congruence with my latest thinking in The Pagan Christ and in Water into Wine. So you're not reading something from way in the past. But I want to read you just the little parable or story from the beginning, because it sets the mood for the rest of the evening as far as I'm concerned anyway. It's a parable which I wrote. It's called The Spring of Living Water. There was once a vast wilderness void of all vegetation but thorns and brambles. Through this desert there wound a highway along which the whole of humanity was making a pilgrimage. People struggled along it, thirsty, tired, frightened by a host of fears. But at one point there was a spring of water bubbling out of the rock. For countless ages, the travelers journeying along this road stopped to refresh themselves there. As they did so, they found to their surprise the waters not only slaked their thirst, but satisfied their deeper needs as well. Somehow they found healings, and their hopes and their courage growing strong again. Life became rich with fresher meaning. They could grasp their various burdens and take to the way again with new heart. They called this spot the place of living waters, and the spring itself the water of life. As time went on, however, many began to roll up boulders as monuments of gratitude. As the generations passed, these monuments became ever more elaborate, until the spring itself at last was totally enclosed, arched over by a great fortress-like cathedral protected by high walls. A certain caste of men with peculiar robes and a special language began to set rules for preserving the purity of the spring. Access was no longer free, and arguments over who could drink there, when they could drink there, and how often became so bitter that there were wars that were fought over them. The victors always, of course, put up more monuments in gratitude for winning. And so it was, as the years rolled by, the spring itself was also bricked over. The spring itself was also bricked over and lost from view. But when pilgrims complained and many were found fainting or near death on the road, those who were in charge mocked their cries or ignored them entirely. Ornate services were carried out inside the holy place to celebrate what the water had done for the pilgrims in the long past, while at the gates there were people dying of thirst. Eventually some other water was piped in, but it seemed a shadow compared with the reality that once had been there for everybody. Sometimes there were strange figures came in from the wilderness saying that the guardians of the well should repent and tear away all these obstructions so that the masses might drink. Later they were called prophets and were greatly honored, but at the moment of their protest they were rejected. Many were killed. So in the end, the majority of those who journeyed along avoided the place, and they survived whatever way they could. Many of them, recalling the stories they'd learned in youth about the spring, were seized with a nostalgia and with longings too deep to utter. Others struggled on, embittered by doubts that the healing water ever existed. Yet sometimes at night, when all the ceremonies were still and the lights were out, those few pilgrims who stole into the shrine to rest briefly in some corner were sure they could hear an almost miraculous sound. From somewhere, deep under the foundations of that great structure, there came the faint echo of running waters, and their eyes would brim with tears. What I have come to see and understand in my own spiritual journey is that the metaphor of this well, or fountain of life, to use the words of the psalmist, refers not to a message, not to a gift from outside, but to an inner reality already present, but too often unknown, unrecognized in every heart and mind. This reality is the pearl of great price, the philosopher's stone, The mystery kept secret by hierophants of old, the special gnosis, or knowledge of the Gnostics, the wisdom of the sages from the dawn of humankind. And it is this, in its simplicity, that there is deep in the body, mind, spirit, reality of every human being alive, a secret spring that wells up continuously. It is from a divine and hidden source, and is the secret of our true humanity. My books try to be about that, and about how to discover it, and how to enrich your life as a result of that discovery. And so the Pagan Christ, while it came as a shocker to many people, this is the American edition in paperback, has a rather different cover with a man facing both directions, pagan and Christian. And the subtitle is Blind Faith Killing Christianity. At the very beginning of the book, The Pagan Christ, I quote from St. Augustine, perhaps the most brilliant mind in the first centuries of the Church. He said this in his Retractationes: the very thing which is now, he's writing in the 4th century, the very thing which is now called the Christian religion existed among the ancients also, nor was it wanting from the inception of the human race until the coming of Christ in the flesh, at which point the true religion, which was already in existence, began to be called Christian. I call that Christianity before Christianity. I'll read you just a few lines from the introduction to The Pagan Christ. One day in the late 60s, while I was teaching at the Toronto School of Theology, a very bright English student at Victoria College in the University of Toronto came to see me in my study with an urgent matter. She was the daughter of a friend of mine and was enrolled in an undergraduate course taught by Northrop Frye, perhaps the most brilliant theological mind that we in Canada had produced, a course for which he was justly renowned. Her problem was that her rather conservative evangelical faith was being deeply challenged. The towering scholar, later to become internationally known, in particular for his classic books on the Bible, especially the Great Code, was telling his classes with all its usual wit and verve that the Bible was not a document concerned with history, but a vast collection of sublime myths and metaphors. Though I was far from following any form of fundamentalism at the time, I remember trying to assure her, not without difficulty, that there was indeed a profoundly historical core to all of it. That had been my background, it suited the college's ethos, and so on. At that time I knew very little of Northrop Frye's actual thinking, apart from her report. 15 years passed before I read the newly published Great Code, and then its sequel, Words with Power. And I came to a much fuller understanding of what Northrop Frye had been talking about. That experience and his words were in the back of my mind all through the months of research and the writing that went into The Pagan Christ. I found myself in particular recalling John Aiken's lines in his introduction to Frye's last work called Double Vision. And he said this: in a legendary undergraduate course, Northrop Frye reminded his students that when the Bible is historically accurate, it is only so by accident, because reporting was not of the slightest interest to its writers. That is a truth that, believe me, should be I think, tattooed on the forehead of every theological student and minister in the whole country, because North America today, we are drowning in a sea of literalism where everybody thinks, or seems to think, that the four Gospels are actually histories of a man who lived in Palestine at a certain period in history, that they are biographies. In a moment in the discussion, I will show you how they are anything but biographies, and how Northrop Frye was right when he said they didn't care about history. History is only one damn thing after another. What is important is the meaning of history. What is the meaning of what is going on subjectively in the human heart, in our own evolution, and as a race? That is what the ancients cared about. And they expressed it not in history, though they did it in a guise that looks like history. They even used the odd historical name, they threw them in. But that was not the real point. They told them by means of myth. You can't understand the pagan Christ, and I don't think you can understand Christianity if you don't understand what a myth is. A myth, in the philosophical sense, in the theological sense, is something that never was, but always is. Now, Joseph Campbell said that, not Tom Harper. But it is true that a myth embodies in the amber, if you like, of its beauty a central truth which can only be told that way. It can't be told in any other way. And the same is true with metaphor. As the little boy said, what's a metaphor? Well, a meta is for taking you from one place where you are now to another place where you've never been before in your imagination and in your mind. Meta means beyond, as in metaphysics means beyond physics. Aristotle wrote his physics, then he wrote his metaphysics. Meta means beyond, and for comes from pharaoh in Greek, which means to carry, bury, or move on. So a metaphor is something which moves you beyond. It moves you on. Joseph Campbell he was fond of saying, people can't seem to get the difference between denotation and connotation. Denotation is if you go out and you see a sign that says one way. It denotes a certain thing. It denotes a direction. Traffic signs denote. But the connotation of a word, the connotation of a metaphor, is all that surrounds it. It is the richness that is around it. Make a mistake, and that's what's happening with literalism. Literalism is mistaking connotation for denotation. It says Jesus was born in Bethlehem, then Jesus must have been born in Bethlehem, and that must be the right date, and so on. And the dates are hopeless, and they don't add up, and the things contradict itself all over the place, but that doesn't bother them. They just persist, keep on reading it as if it was simply a history. It's not. Let me just, I was going to read a bit from Pagan Christ first, but I won't. I'll take the next step. In the Pagan Christ, I tried to show how Christianity is the development of a much older story that existed hundreds and hundreds of years before in Egypt. Everybody is familiar with the Christian symbol of Mary, the Madonna, with the baby in her arms. Nothing could be more Christian than that. And people are utterly shocked when you tell them that that image was on the roofs of temples and on the walls of temples thousands of years before the Gospels were even thought of being written. And the woman was Isis, and the child was Horus. So much so, because the Roman legions, when they went with them, when they moved into the various countries of Europe and of the ancient Near East that they conquered, they carried statues of Isis and Horus with them. And today we can't always tell whether these statues or paintings or icons are meant to be of the Virgin Mary and Jesus, or if they're meant to be of Isis and Horus. They are indistinguishable. And the so-called black Madonnas that you've read about, they are black because it's an Egyptian woman. It is black. She was black. And she was called Theotokos, which is what the Roman Catholic and the Greek Orthodox have called the Virgin Mary ever since the earliest centuries. Theotokos means mother or bearer of God. But Isis, the mother of Horus in Egypt, in the Osirian religion, was called Theotokos, or mother of God, centuries and centuries and centuries before the Gospels were ever written. Mary is called in Catholic theology the Queen of Heaven. Isis was called the Queen of Heaven in the Egyptian papyri thousands of years before. The story of Horus, I show in the pagan Christ, is the story of Jesus, that Horus healed the blind and made the lame to walk, and all the things that are told of Jesus, and walked on the water and had 12 disciples. And the whole story is all there. Now this has shocked and rocked and offended and liberated a lot of people, thankfully. Out of thousands of emails, it is just incredible, people saying, for the first time I feel a sense of freedom of the guilt and of the uncertainties that I never dared to voice before and have had since a child. Anyway, just in that process I made the case for metaphor and for myth, and then I realized this. One Sunday in the early 1970s, I was doing a guest preaching stint at an Anglican congregation at a historic downtown Toronto church. The sermon was somewhat controversial in thrust, and as I came down from the pulpit, the minister who was in charge of the church was already on his way to meet me at the chancel steps. I was surprised. I mean, turning to me, he said, "You can't leave it there, Tom." He then proceeded to disagree with every major point I had made in my sermon. The people in the pews gasped. Naturally, I responded with some gusto, and we began an impromptu debate that lasted for nearly an hour. I hear there were more pot roasts offered as burnt offerings that day. No, but nobody left. Nobody even stirred. At one point, I invited anybody who wanted to join in, and several did so vigorously. I still meet people today who say they were there at that service, and they have never attended a church service quite like it ever since. Harold Bloom, the well-known American literary critic, best-selling author, Jewish, comments, "Quests for the historical Jesus invariably fail, even those by the most responsible searchers. The questers, however careful, end up by finding themselves, and not the elusive, evasive Yeshua, enigma of enigmas. To my own mind, from my study, they strike me like people looking for treasure down a deep well and finding only their own reflections in the water." In his 2005 book, Jesus and Yahweh, the Names Divine, Harold Bloom says he's completely baffled as a scholar by the human comedy, that's an exact quote, human comedy, of this never-ending search. He describes reading the work of such prominent New Testament experts as Raymond Brown and Father J.P. Meyer, and wondering, quote, why they will not admit how hopelessly little we actually know about Jesus. The New Testament has been ransacked by 2 centuries now of minute scholarship, but all that labor does not result in telling us the minimal information that we would demand on any parallel matter. As for Flavius Josephus, a Jewish writer from the 1st century, upon whose shoulders the entire shaky case for Jesus' historicity is made to rest, Bloom bluntly and in my opinion rightly states he was, quote, a wonderful writer and a non-stop liar. The subject is vast, and I hesitate in a way to open it up, but I have done so, and done so boldly, and this is now your opportunity to ask the question.
Does anyone have any questions?
Don't be afraid to write them. You won't be held culpable for anything. It's just to keep people from making speeches instead of asking questions. I have found it's a very dangerous thing to do this, to invite people to write questions and offer to answer them without having seen them, but that's what we're going to try and do. Thank you very much. The first one is, thank you. The first one is not a question, but a comment. This writer says, you did not mention faith. Well, you know, it's a little bit like trying to judge a man on the basis of one sermon. It's very difficult to give the whole of your theology in the small amount of time that I've taken, but I didn't mention faith, and I will mention it. Faith is very important, but faith can be overemphasized. And one of the things that we're seeing right now, an interesting reaction, the number of atheists who are coming to the fore and attacking in their books. The God Delusion stands out by Professor Dawkins of Oxford, but also Sam Harris, and you can name it. We're seeing a kind of a peaking of atheistic thought. And in a way I welcome it because it's challenging the sea of mindless faith that is out there. That be ignorant. I don't mean to be elitist or anything like that. But the ignorance that is out there among the mass, rank and file of ordinary Christians, and their inability to think, and their unwillingness to think, and their willingness to put down people who do think, is extraordinary. And I welcome the attacks of the atheists to that extent, in that they are challenging some of the hokum that is passing for religion in North America today. It is awesomely awful. I mean, you read Dawkins. It's like the proverbial, taking the shotgun to the barn door. I mean, he's got such a huge target to hit. But I mean, some of the quotations in there that he gives you will make your flesh creep. And these are Christians that he's quoting from Christian documents, saying that they want people to learn to hate because it's time to learn to hate in America because that's how bad things have gotten and how vicious the attack on people of faith has become in their paranoid minds. So they think it's good to hate. I mean, it staggers me, strictly. And as I look at the television documentaries have come out before Easter, and they keep coming out with, I mean, it's open field day now from the other side on documentaries on biblical themes. The lack of reason and the inability to tell what is evidence and what isn't evidence is absolutely astonishing. I sometimes I just look at it, my jaw drops. I think, and their books are being written. One about the empty tomb of the Jesus family. It's a piece of junk, and I don't mind being quoted on that. It begins with a hypothesis at the beginning, but before you're very many pages into it, the hypothesis has become not a hypothesis anymore. It is actual fact. The maker of that film invited me to come to Toronto, and I was somewhat flattered. He wanted my opinion and help and film me commenting on his theory. He didn't explain his theory very well to me, but we spent most of the day at Knox College, and I was being filmed, and I knew pretty soon I was not giving him the answers that he wanted to get from me, and I was very interested when the final documentary appeared to see that I didn't even merit one friend. and I don't blame him, but I mean, really, truly, that's such a shock at that one. I mean, there's supposed to be a family tomb of Jesus for all those years in Jerusalem, and nobody else would have gone and produced the bone. Anyway, I mean, he had. I won't go into that. There is so much mindlessness out there that I'm very cautious. Yes, we need faith, but don't use faith when you should be thinking. The most precious thing God has given you and has given me is our mind, our reason. And yet I'll meet Christians who practically, they have no room for anyone who's intellectual or who thinks as if it was somehow a sin. That is the highest gift. It is part of the Christ within you, your mind. So, yes, by all means, faith. I think, I was asked the other night in our house, a question came in, can you think your way to God? Well, yes and no. I mean, I think you have to think a great deal about your faith if you're going to be a person of faith. It should be a reasonable faith.